Cannabis is the most commonly used illicit drug in the world and has appeared in the news a lot the past few years. But it's difficult to discern what's real from what's exaggerated. Welcome back to Beyond Essentials. I'm Renika, and today we're focusing on the facts about cannabis. Cannabis has been used medicinally and recreationally across the world for thousands of years, though it wasn't popular in the United States until the 1920s. In the past decade, it's experienced a slow resurgence. Cannabis is a plant whose sap contains a chemical called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC, which is the main ingredient that makes people feel high. THC stimulates our brain's naturally occurring cannabinoid receptors that regulate hunger and stress. This is what causes the feeling of being high. Just like almost every other substance people use to get high, THC activates the reward circuit in the brain. The amount of THC that's present in a cannabis plant depends on how the plant has been genetically modified to produce more THC and what part of the plant is being used. Modern growing techniques have produced cannabis plants with much higher levels of THC than in the past. The average strength of the marijuana plant in the US today is around 15 to 20%, whereas the pot smoked at Woodstock in 1969 and through the late 1970s contained roughly 1% THC. The THC levels also vary depending on what part of the plant is being used, with the flowering buds having the highest concentration. Hashish is actually the dried sap of the plant, and hash oil is a product made from hash. As you likely know, there are many products that contain THC, but are not direct parts of the plant, including a variety of edible products and waxes and oils that are used in vaporizers. People generally use THC through inhalation or oral ingestion. Inhaling THC leads to a quicker onset of action than eating it, since the drug gets into the bloodstream and thus to the brain much faster. It's easier to consume more THC than intended when taken orally, though. That's because the delay between eating the drug and when you feel its effect is so long that people misjudge the dose and often eat more, believing it will get them high sooner. Let's take a moment and hear from real people as they share their experience with cannabis addiction. Afterwards, your facilitator will follow up with a discussion.
There's a common misconception that weed is not addictive.
I never thought I was addicted to marijuana. I thought it was just something that was part of my lifestyle. I thought it helped me relax.
I've become so accustomed to being stoned every night. When I wasn't doing it, it was out of the norm.
Once you smoke it, you really don't feel like you can do anything without it. You know, you just feel so high. You just want to be high for everything you do.
And there was nothing that I wanted to do with my day other than smoke weed. It was so weird. That was my driven purpose.
I always had this idea in my mind that I can live life and smoke weed at the same time, but I never could.
I'd want to get high every day. You know, I'd want to get high when I woke up in the mornings.
My mind was so set on having it that it preoccupied so much of my thinking that became all that I did. That was all I thought about.
If I ran out of weed, I'd be pretty mad.
Irritable and annoyed with everything.
I was tired, I was nervous, I was anxious.
I couldn't sleep without it. You know, I'd be up for days when I tried to stop.
It's an emotional roller coaster. It's very hard on you.
I'd feel depressed by not having done anything better with my life, but I would still use the drug to hide from the problem.
I was actually prom king. The drug dogs came to school, and I'd had some joint roaches in the ashtray of my truck. And they found them. I got kicked out of school for it.
I dropped out of school, you know, I had no job, had no money to pay rent.
It unconsciously separated me from my family, and I was always concerned with when I was gonna go out and party, and it just, the priority list of friends or family just slipped underneath.
I stopped trying, and when that started, it just led to a different lifestyle.
If I needed to get a job interview that included a drug test, I wouldn't take that job because I couldn't stop using it.
I had a BMW, and I loved that car. I loved it. I was so high, and I just floored it, just went all out in it, and I took a curve and I lost it. Flipped the car over, and my first reaction, I had a quarter-pound of weed in there, and my first reaction was grab the bag full of my weed.
One of my friends was smoking pot, him and a buddy. He was going like 80, went off the road and hit a tree, killed my other buddy.
I wound up in prison. I served 3 years, 11 months, and 19 days.
I've been locked up since I started smoking about 12 or 14 times.
Went to jail and been facing charges ever since. Got a felony on my record.
It ruins your chances to get a good job. It ruins your chances to get anywhere. You know, once you have a record, that's it. So it's not fun at all.
What did you relate to when these people shared their stories about cannabis addiction? Was there anything surprising that you heard? Does anyone want to share their own experience with cannabis use disorder? Many people don't think marijuana is addictive, but scientific data states otherwise. THC is a drug that affects the brain and activates the reward circuit. People can become addicted to anything that activates the reward circuit, from gambling to food to drugs. THC is no different. Studies have shown that about 10% of people who try cannabis go on to develop a cannabis use disorder, and that quitting cannabis is just as difficult as quitting any other substance. THC has a major impact on the brain and body. THC intoxication can cause euphoria and increased appetite and heart rate, red eyes, impaired coordination and memory, and delayed reaction times. Taking too much THC produces anxiety, paranoia, or delirium, but not overdose. However, regular cannabis users do develop tolerance to THC. This means more of the substance is necessary to achieve a high. Similarly, withdrawal does occur from reduced levels of THC in the body. THC withdrawal isn't physically dangerous, but symptoms include poor sleep, poor appetite, increased irritability, and physical aches. Cannabis is more dangerous for some groups than for others. First, people who've developed substance use disorders from other drugs. Second, those with elevated risk of developing schizophrenia. It's been shown that people who smoke cannabis heavily have a higher chance of developing a psychotic illness, and that the more they smoke, the higher the risk. Third are adolescents whose brains are still developing. Any drug, including cannabis, has the potential of severely altering the developing brain. So we know cannabis can be addictive, but there are some facts about cannabis that have been distorted a bit in the media. First, cannabis does not cause permanent brain damage or amotivational syndrome. If someone is under the influence of the drug all day, every day, they are going to be slower, more forgetful, and less motivated. They'll perform worse on neuropsychological tests. However, if they abstain for a month, their scores return to normal. People try new things and take gradual risks. Using cocaine after using cannabis likely has more to do with increased risk-taking, like interacting with people who have access to illicit drugs, than it does to any biological effect from cannabis. We'll put aside a discussion of medical uses of cannabis. We know there are many drugs that have proven medical uses and are authorized for use in the US, including opioids like morphine, oxycodone, fentanyl, or sedative hypnotics like Xanax or Klonopin. Just because there's a medicinal purpose for a substance doesn't mean it isn't addictive. Let's get back to how cannabis relates to a person in recovery, though. Here are the reasons why we advise a person who hasn't had a cannabis problem to stay away from cannabis. First, the concept of substitution. This is a phenomenon where a substance user stops using one substance of abuse and replaces it with another. For example, someone stops smoking cannabis, but instead starts drinking wine in the evenings, which can lead to an alcohol problem. People who have had substance use disorders are at higher risk of developing other substance use disorders. The risk of developing a cannabis use disorder is higher for people in recovery. Second, using cannabis can put you in contact with people, places, and things that lead to relapse. In most places, cannabis can only be bought illegally, which can put you in contact with people selling other illegal substances. It's risky to put yourself in the situation to have to say no. Third, in recovery, you're still rediscovering ways to have fun and manage negative emotions without substances. Cannabis use will only get in the way of your practice and learning. Now that we've uncovered the truth about cannabis, your facilitator will lead you through a trivia game to test your knowledge. After that, you'll have a brief discussion to wrap up. Can you share anything from today's group that changed your perspective about cannabis? What do you think is an important takeaway from today's group?